The days after the battle were quiet in a way that felt wrong. The Reliance had docked at a coalition station to transfer the rescued colonists to safety. Velictor watched the process from the observation deck. Human crew members helped the survivors off the ship with gentle hands and soft voices. Children who had been screaming in terror just days ago were now laughing at jokes told by the Marines who had saved them. A little girl with brown hair refused to leave Hannah Cole's side. She held the doctor's hand and followed her everywhere. Her parents had died in the attack. She had no one else. Cole did not push her away. She let the girl follow her and talked to her about silly things like favorite colors and imaginary friends. The Marines took turns carrying the girl on their shoulders and making her giggle. Velictor recorded all of this. He noted the way humans formed bonds with strangers in moments of crisis. He documented their capacity for kindness even after experiencing violence. He filed his observations under social behavior and moved on. But something nagged at him. Something did not fit. He found Captain Bennett in her ready room reviewing reports. She looked tired. Dark circles had formed under her eyes and her movements were slow and heavy. She invited him to sit and offered him a drink of something called coffee. He declined. Coffee was not safe for Kethvari digestion. Velictor asked her a question that had been bothering him since the battle. He asked why the Reliance had attacked without waiting for reinforcements. He asked why she had risked her ship and her crew for strangers. Standard tactical doctrine would have recommended caution. The odds had been against them. Logic had been against them. Bennett was quiet for a long moment. She looked at her hands and then at the viewport behind her desk. She told him about her daughter. The girl was 7 years old and lived with her grandmother on Earth. She told him that when she saw those children on the freighter, she thought of her own child. She imagined her daughter scared and alone and waiting for help that might never come. She told Velictor that logic had nothing to do with it. Tactics had nothing to do with it. When humans saw children in danger, they did not think. They acted. It was built into them on a level deeper than training or discipline. It was something they could not control, even if they wanted to. Velictor did not understand. His species valued logic above all else. Emotions were useful tools, but they should never override rational thought. The idea of making life or death decisions based on feelings was alien to him in the truest sense of the word. 3 days later, the Reliance received new orders. Coalition intelligence had analyzed the information gathered from the captured Draxith commander. They had located the raider base hidden in an asteroid field in the Vethkar system. The base was responsible for dozens of attacks on civilian vessels. It was a hub for the slave trade that the Draxith ran throughout the sector. Standard procedure would be to report the coordinates to Coalition Command and wait for a full battle fleet to be assembled. The process would take weeks. During those weeks, more ships would be attacked. More civilians would be taken. More children would disappear into the slave markets. Earth Command sent different orders. The Reliance was to neutralize the threat immediately. Kevin Park presented the tactical analysis in the briefing room. The base was heavily fortified and protected by at least 12 combat vessels. The asteroid field made navigation dangerous and limited attack options. The Reliance was one ship against a small fleet defending a prepared position. Park calculated the survival probability at 23%. Velictor expected the crew to protest. He expected arguments and debates and demands for more support. Instead, he saw nods of acceptance. He saw grim determination. He saw Marines checking their weapons and pilots reviewing flight plans. No one questioned the mission. No one asked for an alternative. Captain Bennett offered crew members the chance to transfer to the station. Anyone who wanted to leave could do so without shame or consequence. She said she would not force anyone to take part in a mission with such low odds. She waited for responses. No one left. Not a single crew member requested transfer. The navigation officer said something about not wanting to miss the fun. The weapons officer made a joke about Draxith target practice. Even the youngest ensign on the ship refused to abandon her post. Velictor was given the same choice. A supply shuttle was leaving for a nearby colony, and he could be on it. He would be safe. He would survive. He would return to his homeworld and write his report about human military behavior. He stayed. He told himself it was for observation purposes. He told himself he needed to document the full scope of human combat capabilities. He knew he was lying. The truth was simpler and more frightening. He wanted to see what would happen. He needed to understand these creatures, even if the understanding destroyed him. The Reliance departed the station and set course for the asteroid field. The journey took 18 hours. Velictor spent most of that time walking through the ship and watching the crew prepare. He saw fear in their eyes. He saw doubt in their movements. But he also saw something else. Something that burned underneath the fear, like a fire that refused to die. Daniel Ortega found him in the observation lounge staring at the stars. The Marine sat down beside him without invitation and offered him a strange human food called a candy bar. Velictor declined. Chocolate was mildly toxic to his species. Ortega asked him why he had stayed. The question was direct and honest in the way Velictor was beginning to associate with humans. He thought about his answer for a long time before responding. He told Ortega that he had spent his entire career observing military forces. He had documented tactics and strategies across the galaxy. He understood war as a concept, but he had never understood warriors. He had never grasped what made intelligent beings willing to die for causes larger than themselves. Ortega laughed. It was a warm sound without mockery. He told Velictor that humans did not really understand it either. They just did it. They saw someone in trouble and they helped. They saw evil and they fought it. They did not stop to calculate odds or weigh consequences. They acted because acting was the right thing to do. He told Velictor about his family. He had 3 sisters back on Earth. The youngest was 16. When he thought about the children taken by Draxith slavers, he thought about her. He imagined her in chains. He imagined her sold to monsters. The thought made him want to burn every Draxith base in the galaxy. That was why he fought. Not for glory or medals or pay. He fought because somewhere out there a child was scared and alone and waiting for someone to save them. He could not save everyone. He knew that. But he could save some of them. And that was enough. Velictor looked at the Marine with new eyes. He had classified humans as aggressive and irrational. He had dismissed their combat behavior as primitive instinct. But now he was beginning to see something else. Something deeper. Humans were not driven by aggression. They were driven by love. They loved their families. They loved their friends. They loved strangers they had never met. And when that love was threatened, they became something terrifying. They became protectors. They became avengers. They became the nightmare that monsters whispered about in the dark. The Reliance dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the asteroid field. The Draxith base lay ahead, surrounded by rocks and defended by warships. Alarms began to sound. Weapons began to charge. Crew members took their positions with steady hands and clear eyes. Velictor stood on the bridge and watched Captain Bennett give her final orders. Her voice was calm and her posture was confident. She looked at her crew, and they looked back at her. Something passed between them that required no words. Then the Reliance flew into the asteroid field, and the battle began. 2 weeks later, Velictor stood before the High Council of the Kethvori people. The council chamber was vast and ancient, with walls of polished stone that had witnessed 1,000 generations of deliberation. 17 council members sat in a curved formation with their 4 eyes focused on him. Behind them sat dozens of senior analysts and military advisors. The room was filled with the most powerful minds of his species. They had summoned him to present his findings on human military capabilities. The coalition was considering expanding trade agreements with the human sector. The HFY had been asked to provide an assessment of potential risks. Velicther's report would influence decisions that affected billions of lives. He had prepared his presentation carefully. Charts and statistics filled his datapad. He had compiled reaction times and tactical doctrines and technological assessments. He had everything the council expected from a military analyst. Hard facts, cold numbers, logical conclusions. He began with the basics. Human ships were rugged, but not elegant. Their weapons were effective, but not exceptional. Their tactical doctrines were flexible, but often reckless. He described their command structures and communication protocols. He analyzed their strengths and weaknesses in conventional combat scenarios. The council listened politely. Some of them began reviewing other documents. A few of them looked bored. This was all standard material. This was exactly what they expected from an observation mission. There was nothing new here. Nothing interesting. Velicther stopped reading from his notes. He looked up at the council and felt something shift inside him. He thought about Laura Bennett holding the hand of a dying ensign. He thought about Daniel Ortega carrying wounded colonists while blood dripped from his own injuries. He thought about Amy Chun and her daughter's name. He put down his datapad and spoke from memory. He told them about the Morning Star. He told them about 300 colonists, including 47 children, trapped on a burning freighter. He told them about a single destroyer attacking 3 raiders without hesitation or calculation. He told them about humans flying into certain death because children were screaming. The council stopped looking bored. They stopped reviewing other documents. Every eye in the room was fixed on Velicther. He told them about the boarding action. He told them about Marines who moved through blood-soaked corridors with terrible efficiency. He told them about a young girl who refused to let go of Hannah Cole's hand. He told them about a Draxith commander trembling in fear because it had looked into the eyes of a human protecting children. He told them about the battle in the asteroid field. He told them about impossible odds and desperate tactics. He told them about a captain who sacrificed her ship's defenses to save strangers on a freighter she had never seen before. He told them about a pilot who said her daughter's name and flew into an enemy vessel. The chamber was silent. No one moved. No one breathed. Velicther told them the truth. Humans did not fight like other species. They did not calculate costs and benefits. They did not weigh risks against rewards. When someone they loved was threatened, they became something beyond logic or reason. They became protectors who would burn the galaxy to save a single child. He warned the council that humans should never be provoked. Not because they were the strongest species. Not because they had the most advanced technology. Not because they were the most skilled warriors. They should never be provoked because they were the most dangerous kind of enemy. An enemy that would spend everything and sacrifice everything for principles they could not even properly explain. Humans would die for strangers. They would kill for children they had never met. They would fly burning ships into enemy vessels while whispering the names of daughters waiting at home. They would do all of this while laughing and crying and being impossibly, wonderfully, terrifyingly human. A council member raised her hand. She asked if humans could be reasoned with. She asked if they could be trusted as allies. She asked if the HFY should fear them. Velicther considered the question. He remembered the final days of his mission aboard the Reliance. He remembered sitting in a mess hall with Kevin Park learning a human card game. He remembered Hannah Cole teaching him about human medicine and human music. He remembered Daniel Ortega sharing stories about his sisters. He remembered the moment before he left the ship. Captain Bennett had shaken his hand in the human fashion. She had thanked him for his service. She had told him that he was always welcome aboard the Reliance. She had called him a friend. Velictor told the council that yes, humans could be reasoned with. They could be the finest friends the galaxy had ever known. They were capable of great kindness and great generosity. They would share their food and their stories, and their laughter with strangers from across the stars. But he also told them this. He had been assigned to watch humans in battle. He had completed his mission, and now he wished he had not, because he could no longer see humans as primitives or curiosities or threats. He could only see them as what they truly were, the most compassionate and most terrifying species in the known universe. Wrapped in the same fragile package, his final recommendation was simple. Do not fight humans. Do not threaten what they love. Do not harm their children or enslave their people or attack their homes. Because if you do these things, they will come for you. They will come with fire and fury and the terrible patience of creatures who have nothing left to lose. But if you are fortunate enough to earn their friendship, then hold on to it with everything you have. Because humans protect their own. And once they decide that you are one of them, then you are protected too. The council sat in silence for a long time after he finished speaking. Then the eldest member rose from her seat. She was ancient and wise and had guided the Kethvari people for decades. She looked at Velictor with all four of her eyes. And she asked him one final question. She asked if he considered himself a friend of humanity. Velictor thought about Laura, Bennett and her daughter on Earth. He thought about Kevin Park and his card games. He thought about Hannah Cole and the little girl who followed her everywhere. He thought about Daniel Ortega and his three sisters. He thought about Amy Chun and Lily. He told the council that yes, he considered himself a friend of humanity. He had seen them at their worst and their best. He had watched them kill with cold efficiency and weep with open hearts. He had witnessed their violence and their kindness, their fury and their love, and he would carry them with him forever. The memory of humans in battle, the memory of humans in peace, the memory of creatures who were both monster and angel wrapped in fragile skin. He would remember them until the day he died. The council thanked him for his report. They would take his recommendations under advisement. They would consider the implications of his observations. They would decide the future of human Kethvari, relations based on his testimony. Velictor left the council chamber and walked out into the bright sunlight of his homeworld. He stood on the steps of the great building and looked up at the sky. Somewhere out there among the stars was a ship called the Reliance. Somewhere out there was a crew of impossible creatures who had changed his understanding of the universe. He had been assigned to watch humans in battle. He had expected to find primitives and savages. Instead, he had found something he could not name. Something precious and terrible and beautiful beyond words. He had found humanity. And humanity had found him. Now he wished he could go back. Not to unsee what he had seen, but to see more, to understand more, to be part of something larger than himself. Perhaps one day he would. Perhaps one day he would return to the stars and find the Reliance waiting for him. Perhaps Captain Bennett would shake his hand again and call him friend. Until then, he would carry their stories. He would tell anyone who would listen about the humans he had met, about their laughter and their tears, about their fury and their love, about creatures who would burn the galaxy to save a child they had never met, and who would call a stranger from the stars their friend. The asteroid field was a maze of spinning rocks and hidden dangers. Ships 3 times the size of the Reliance had been lost in fields like this. Navigation required precision and caution and careful calculation. The humans ignored all of that. They flew into the field at full speed with weapons blazing and shields, straining against the constant bombardment of debris. Velictor held onto his console as the ship twisted and turned through impossible gaps. Asteroids the size of buildings passed within meters of the hull. Alarms screamed warnings that the crew seemed to ignore. The navigation officer was laughing again. She called the asteroids by names like they were old friends. She dodged between them with movements that should have been impossible. The first Dragzith patrol ships found them within minutes. 4 raiders emerged from behind a massive rock formation and opened fire. The Reliance took hits to its forward shields and returned fire with everything it had. 2 raiders fell in the first exchange. The other 2 broke off and called for reinforcements. Captain Bennett had expected this. She was counting on it. She wanted the Dragzith to send every ship they had. She wanted them focused on the Reliance, while the real attack happened somewhere else. 6. Human fighters had launched before the Reliance entered the asteroid field. They flew dark with their systems powered down and their signals masked. While the Dragzith concentrated on the destroyer, the fighters slipped through the gaps in their defense. Their target was not the raider ships. Their target was the base itself. Velictor watched the tactical display and tried to understand the strategy. It was reckless and desperate, and it relied on the Dragzith behaving exactly as expected. If anything went wrong, the Reliance would be destroyed, and the fighters would be stranded behind enemy lines. There was no backup plan. There was no margin for error. More Dragzith ships arrived, 8, then 10, then 12. The Reliance was surrounded and outgunned by a factor of 5 to 1. Enemy fire pounded the shields from every direction. Systems began failing across the ship. A fire broke out on Deck 3. The medical bay reported a dozen injured crew members. Kevin Park coordinated the defense with calm efficiency. He shifted power between shields and weapons with perfect timing. He called out targets and firing solutions. He tracked a dozen threats simultaneously. Sweat dripped down his face, but his voice never wavered. Then something unexpected happened. A civilian freighter emerged from the far side of the asteroid field. It was a transport ship carrying supplies to a mining colony. The ship had stumbled into the battle by accident. It had no weapons and no defenses. The Dragzith would destroy it in seconds. Bennett made a choice that Velictor would never forget. She ordered the Reliance to break from the defensive formation and intercept the freighter. The ship turned its back on half the enemy fleet to protect a handful of strangers. The cost was immediate. 2 Dragzith raiders poured fire into the Reliance's exposed hull. Armor plating shattered and atmosphere vented from a dozen breaches. Crew members were thrown from their stations. The lights flickered and died before emergency power kicked in, but the freighter escaped. It jumped to faster-than-light speed and vanished to safety. 53 civilians who would have died were now alive because the Reliance had taken the hits meant for them. Velictor could not comprehend it. The tactical decision made no sense. The Reliance had sacrificed its position and its shields to save people they had never met. People who had no strategic value. People who could not help them win the battle. It was illogical. It was irrational. It was human. The fighters reached the base while the Dragzith fleet focused on the Reliance. 2 of them were destroyed by automated defenses. The other 4 pressed on. They targeted the base's reactor core with precision strikes that punched through the station's armor. The explosions that followed lit up the asteroid field like a second sun. The base died in fire and fury. Its reactors detonated in a chain reaction that consumed everything within 100 kilometers. 3 Dragzith ships that were too close to the explosion were vaporized. 2 more were crippled by debris. The remaining raiders suddenly found themselves without reinforcements or resupply. But the victory came with a price. One of the human fighters was caught in the blast radius. Her name was Amy Chun. She was 29 years old with black hair and a smile that could light up a room. Her ship had taken damage during the attack run, and her engines had failed at the worst possible moment. She could not escape the explosion. Velictha monitored her communications in the final seconds. She knew she was going to die. Her voice was calm and steady as she reported her status. She said she had no regrets. She said the mission was worth it. Then she said one more thing, a single word. A name. Lily. Her daughter, 3 years old, waiting at home for a mother who would never return. Amy Chun steered her crippled fighter toward a Draxith raider that was trying to flee the destruction. She could have ejected. She could have tried to save herself. Instead, she used her last moments to take one more enemy with her. The collision destroyed both ships in a flash of light. Velictha did not realize. He was weeping until the tears blurred his vision. He had never cried before. His species did not cry. But something had broken inside him. Something had changed in ways he could not name. The remaining Draxith ships fled. They scattered into the asteroid field and jumped to faster-than-light speed without looking back. The base was destroyed. The slave operation was finished. The sector was safe. The Reliance limped out of the asteroid field with half its systems offline and a third of its crew injured. The ship looked like it had been through a war. It had been through a war. But it was still flying, still fighting, still protecting. Captain Bennett surveyed the damage from her command chair. Her uniform was torn and blood trickled from a cut on her forehead. She listened to damage reports with tired eyes. She asked about every injured crew member by name. She remembered their families. She remembered their stories. Kevin Park collapsed into his chair and closed his eyes for just a moment. Daniel Ortega appeared on the bridge with bandages on his arms and a smile on his face. He reported that all Marines had survived the battle. Hannah Cole called from the medical bay with an update on the wounded. Her voice was exhausted but determined. The crew of the Reliance had won an impossible victory. They had destroyed a fortified base defended by superior numbers. They had saved countless future victims from slavery and death. And they had lost 3 of their own in the process. 3 pilots who would never go home. Velictha recorded the names. Marcus Cole, who had ejected safely during the first battle. Tony Reeves, who had died in the initial fighter assault. Amy Chun, who had sacrificed herself to protect her shipmates. He would remember their names forever. He would carry their stories with him. That night, Velictha sat alone in his quarters and tried to write his report. The words would not come. He had observed human combat behavior. He had documented their tactics and strategies. But he could not capture what he had truly witnessed. He had seen creatures who joked in the face of death. He had seen warriors who wept for strangers. He had seen a woman say her daughter's name and fly her ship into an enemy vessel. He had seen a captain sacrifice her ship's defenses to save a freighter full of people she would never know. He did not have words for any of it. His species had created languages for 1,000 concepts. But they had never imagined anything like this. They had never imagined humans. Velictha put down his recording device and stared at the ceiling. Sleep would not come. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Amy Chun's fighter burning. Every time he breathed, he heard her say her daughter's name. He had been assigned to watch humans in battle. He had completed his assignment. And now he wished he had not, because he could never unsee what he had seen. He could never unknow what he now knew. Humans were not the aggressive primitives he had been told about. They were something far more complicated and far more beautiful and far more terrible. They were the most dangerous species in the galaxy, and he was only beginning to understand why. Velictha stood before the assignment board and felt his 4 eyes blink in confusion. He read the orders 3 times to make sure he understood them correctly. The Galactic Coalition's Intelligence Division had given him the most boring task imaginable. He was to embed with a human military unit and document their combat methods. Humans, the primitive newcomers who had only discovered faster-than-light travel 40 years ago. The species that most galactic powers considered aggressive, loud, and utterly unremarkable. He was a military analyst of the HFY species. His people were tall and slender with pale blue skin and 4 eyes that could see in multiple light spectrums. The HFY had never engaged in direct combat themselves. They served as neutral observers and tactical advisors to various galactic powers. It was honorable work. Important work. And now the Intelligence Division wanted him to waste his talents watching humans point weapons at things. Veloctor packed his observation equipment and boarded a transport vessel to the human sector. The journey took 6 days. He spent most of that time reading whatever files existed on human military history. The information was sparse and often contradictory. Some reports called humans cowardly. Others called them reckless. A few reports simply said that humans were confusing and left it at that. None of this helped Veloctor prepare for what was coming. The USS Reliance was a mid-sized destroyer that looked rough around the edges. It was not sleek like HFY vessels or elegant like Vethemery cruisers. It looked functional, practical, almost ugly. Veloctor stepped aboard and immediately noticed the smell. Humans had a distinct odor that was not unpleasant, but was certainly noticeable. The ship itself hummed with energy and activity. Crew members rushed past him carrying equipment and shouting orders to each other. Captain Lavra Bennett met him in the docking bay. She was shorter than Veloctor expected. Most humans were shorter than most galactic species. She had brown hair pulled back in a tight knot and eyes the color of wet earth. Her handshake was firm and her smile was warm. She welcomed him aboard and introduced him to her senior staff. First, Officer Kevin Park was a calm man with black hair and a quiet voice. He studied Veloctor with intelligent eyes and asked thoughtful questions about HFY observation methods. Chief Medical Officer Hannah Cole was a woman with red hair and freckles on her nose. She laughed easily and made jokes that Veloctor did not understand. Marine Sergeant Daniel Ortega was built like a cargo container. He had dark skin and hands that looked like they could crush stone. He nodded at Veloctor with professional respect, but said little. The humans seemed friendly, but also amused by his presence. They asked him questions about his homeworld and his species. They offered him food that he could not eat and drinks that would have poisoned him. They apologized and found alternatives. They laughed at their own mistakes. Veloctor noted all of this in his observation log. Humans were social creatures. They sought connection, even with strangers. The mission briefing took place in a cramped room filled with screens and maps. Captain Bennett explained that the Reliance was being deployed to the Vethkar mining colony. Draxith raiders had been attacking civilian transport ships in the area. The Draxith were reptilian predators who lived for violence and profit. They were considered nuisances by most galactic powers. Dangerous nuisances, but nuisances all the same. The Coalition wanted them stopped before they disrupted trade routes. Veloctor expected a standard patrol mission. The Reliance would show its presence in the area, and the Draxith would scatter like the cowards they were. He settled into his assigned quarters and organized his recording equipment. He planned to document the mission thoroughly, even though he expected nothing interesting to happen. He was already composing his final report in his head. Humans were primitive but competent. Their ships were ugly but functional. Their crew was undisciplined but effective. Standard observations that would satisfy the Intelligence Division. 3 days into the patrol, everything changed. Veloctor was in the observation lounge when the alarm sounded. The noise was harsh and loud and made his ears ring. He rushed to the bridge and found organized chaos. Crew members were at their stations and screens were flashing with information. Captain Bennett stood at the center of it all with her hands clasped behind her back. Her face was calm, but her eyes were hard. A distress signal had arrived. A civilian freighter called the Morning Star was under attack. The ship was carrying 300 colonists to a new settlement world. Among them were 47 children. The Draxith had caught the freighter in open space and were tearing it apart. Veloctor watched the humans receive this news. He expected fear or hesitation. Standard Coalition protocol would be to assess the situation and wait for reinforcements. The Draxith were dangerous, and the Reliance was only one ship. Logic demanded caution. Instead, he saw something else in their faces. Something he did not recognize. It was not fear. It was not excitement. It was something harder and colder. Kevin Park calculated the distance to the freighter. 12 minutes at maximum speed. Hannah Cole began preparing the medical bay for casualties. Daniel Ortega gathered his Marines in the lower deck. Everyone moved with purpose and precision. No one questioned the orders because no orders had been given yet. They all knew what they were going to do. Captain Bennett looked at Veloctor. She told him that he was about to see humans in combat. She told him that he could stay on the bridge or he could go to his quarters. She told him that what happened next would not be pretty. She told him that he might not like what he saw. Her voice was calm, but there was something underneath it. Something that made his skin feel cold. Veloctor told her that he would stay on the bridge. He was an observer. It was his duty to observe. Bennett nodded and turned back to her screens. She gave a single order. Maximum speed. All hands to battle stations. The Reliance jumped forward like a predator lunging at prey. The engines roared and the ship shook with power. Veloctor grabbed a railing to steady himself. Around him, the humans worked with quiet efficiency. They checked weapons and shields and navigation. They talked to each other in low voices. Some of them were smiling. Some of them were grim. All of them were ready. Veloctor watched them and felt something strange in his chest. He had studied military forces across the galaxy. He had observed a dozen species in combat situations. He had documented tactics and strategies and battle plans. But he had never seen anything like this. These humans were not preparing for a difficult mission. They were preparing for a hunt. He thought about the children on the freighter. 47 of them. Scared and crying and waiting for help that might never come. He thought about the Draxith raiders circling the damaged ship like scavengers. He thought about what would happen if the Reliance did not arrive in time. Then he looked at Laura Bennett. The captain stood straight and still with her eyes fixed on the view screen. Her jaw was tight and her hands were steady. She was not thinking about tactics or protocols. She was thinking about those children, and she was going to save them or die trying. Veloctor began to understand why the intelligence division had sent him here. Humans were not primitive. They were not unremarkable. They were something else entirely. Something that the galaxy had never seen before. He just did not know what that something was. Not yet, but he was about to find out. The Reliance dropped out of faster-than-light travel, and Veloctor saw the battle for the first time. The civilian freighter Morning Star was burning. Great holes had been torn in its hull, and atmosphere was venting into space like blood from a wound. 3 Draxith raider ships circled the damaged vessel like predators, waiting for their prey to stop struggling. The raiders were sleek and black with weapons bristling from every surface. They were built for one purpose only: killing. Veloctor felt his heart beating fast. He had never been this close to active combat before. His training told him what should happen next. The Reliance should assess the situation. It should calculate the odds. It should request reinforcements from the nearest coalition outpost. Standard protocol demanded caution when outnumbered and outgunned. The logical choice was to wait and observe. Captain Laura Bennett did not wait. She did not observe. She looked at the burning freighter and the circling raiders, and she gave a single command: attack. The bridge erupted into controlled motion. Kevin Park began coordinating weapons fire with calm precision. Tactical officers shouted range calculations and shield frequencies. The ship lurched forward with its weapons already charging. Velictor grabbed his console to keep from falling. This was not standard protocol. This was madness. The Draxith raiders noticed the Reliance too late. They had been focused on their prey and had not expected a single destroyer to attack 3 armed vessels. The first volley from the Reliance tore into the nearest raider and crippled its engines. The second volley finished the job. The raider exploded in a ball of fire and debris. 2 raiders remained. They broke formation and came at the Reliance from different angles. Velictor watched the tactical display and saw the danger immediately. The humans were now caught between 2 enemies with superior firepower. The logical response was to retreat and regroup. The humans did not retreat. They accelerated directly toward the larger of the 2 raiders. The bridge shook as enemy fire struck the shields. Damage reports began flooding in from across the ship. A power conduit had ruptured on Deck 4. 3 crew members were injured in the engine room. The port shields were failing. Through it all, the humans kept working. They patched systems and rerouted power, and returned fire with everything they had. Velictor documented everything with growing unease. He monitored human vital signs through his equipment. Their heart rates were elevated but controlled. Their stress hormones were high but not dangerously so. They were scared. He could see that they were scared. But they kept fighting anyway. That was the part he did not understand. Fear was supposed to drive creatures to flee from danger. These humans were running toward it. Then he heard something that made his skin feel cold. Laughter. The tactical officer was laughing. She had just taken a hit that knocked out half her console, and she was laughing about it. She made a joke about the Draxith having bad aim. Kevin Park responded with something about their mothers. The entire bridge crew chuckled while their ship was being torn apart around them. Velictor did not understand. This was not how combat worked. This was not how living creatures behaved when facing death. He tried to record his observations, but his hands were shaking too much to operate his equipment. The second raider fell when a human pilot named Marcus Cole flew his fighter directly into its weapon array. The explosion destroyed the raider's main guns and gave the Reliance the opening it needed. Captain Bennett ordered a full barrage, and the raider crumbled under the assault. Marcus Cole ejected at the last moment, and his escape pod tumbled through the debris field. 1 raider remained. It had attached itself to the Morning Star, and Draxith's soldiers were boarding the freighter. The civilians were defenseless. The children were defenseless. Velictor watched the tactical display and saw dozens of Draxith life signs moving through the freighter's corridors. He saw civilian life signs disappearing one by one. Daniel Ortega gathered his Marines in the shuttle bay. Velictor found himself walking toward them without knowing why. He told himself it was for observation purposes. He told himself it was his duty to document human ground combat. He did not believe himself. Captain Bennett appeared at his side. She told him again that he could stay on the ship. She told him that what he would see on the freighter could not be unseen. She told him that Draxith boarding actions were brutal and bloody and wrong in ways that would haunt his dreams. Her voice was gentle, but her eyes were not. Velictor told her that he was going. He needed to see. He needed to understand. The shuttle ride to the freighter took 2 minutes. The Marines sat in silence with their weapons ready. Their faces were blank, and their eyes were empty. Velictor had seen this look before in predators waiting to strike. It was the look of creatures who had turned off everything except the instinct to kill. The shuttle docked with the freighter through a damaged airlock. The Marines poured out into the corridor with Velictor following behind them. The The smell hit him first. Blood and smoke and fear. The sounds hit him second. Screaming and gunfire and something that might have been children crying. Ortega led his team forward. They moved in perfect formation with their weapons sweeping every corner. The first Draxith they encountered died before it could raise its weapon. The second died while trying to flee. The third died with a human knife in its throat because Ortega had run out of patience for guns. Velicthar recorded everything. He recorded the precise efficiency of human combat techniques. He recorded the way they covered each other and communicated with hand signals. He recorded the bodies of civilians who had not been fast enough to hide. He recorded a human marine kneeling beside a dead mother still clutching her infant child. The infant was alive. The marine picked it up and held it against his chest while still firing his weapon with his other hand. He passed the infant to another marine who carried it toward the shuttle. No one spoke about it. No one needed to. They found the first group of surviving children in a cargo hold. The Draxith had gathered them for transport to slave markets. 17 small faces looked up at the Marines with terror in their eyes. The terror faded when Hannah Cole appeared. She had followed the Marines aboard with her medical kit. She knelt down and smiled at the children. She told them they were safe now. She told them the monsters were gone. Ortega found a Draxith commander trying to escape through a maintenance tunnel. He dragged the creature back into the corridor and forced it to its knees. Velicthar watched the human's face change. The blank efficiency was gone. Something else had taken its place. Something cold and patient and terrible. Ortega asked the Draxith where the rest of the prisoners were. His voice was calm. His hands were steady. But his eyes held something that Velicthar had never seen before in any species. The Draxith was a creature that feared nothing. It was bred for violence and death. But when it looked into those human eyes, it began to tremble. The Draxith told Ortega everything. It told him about the other prisoners. It told him about the slave routes. It told him about the base hidden in the asteroid field. It told him everything because it had looked into the eyes of a human protecting children, and it had seen its own death waiting there. The surviving raiders fled when the last of their soldiers fell. The Reliance let them go. There would be time to hunt them later. For now, the humans focused on the survivors. They carried the wounded to the shuttle. They wrapped the children in blankets. They held the hands of the dying and whispered words of comfort. Velicthar stood in the blood-soaked corridor and tried to write his report. His people had 1,000 words for tactical concepts. They had terms for every kind of military operation. But they had no words for what he had witnessed today. They had no way to describe creatures who laughed in the face of death and wept for strangers they had never met. He looked at Hannah Cole singing softly to a crying child. He looked at Daniel Ortega standing guard over a group of frightened colonists. He looked at the human Marines still holding their weapons even as they handed out water and food. What manner of creature was this? What kind of species could be so gentle and so terrible at the same time? Velicthar did not have answers. He only had questions. And the questions would not let him sleep that night or any night that followed.